You're sitting in cockpit of P-38 Lightning at Hollandia Air Base, New Guinea, July 28, 1944 at 5:47 a.m., listening to your Allison V-1710 engines idle at regulation 2,200 RPM, while 42-year-old civilian named Charles Lindbergh, yes, that Lindbergh, the man who flew solo across Atlantic 17 years ago, tells you and 15 other fighter pilots to do something that flight training explicitly forbids. Reduce engine speed to 1,600 RPM during combat cruise, lean your fuel mixture to the edge of failure, and fly at settings that every aviation engineer in United States Army Air Forces insists will destroy your engines within hours or send you spinning into Pacific Ocean with seized pistons and dead propellers. Your name is Captain Robert Duke Henshaw, and you've been flying P-38s in Pacific Theater for 8 months. You've survived 32 combat missions, shot down 4 Japanese Zeros, and watched 6 of your squadron mates die. 3 to enemy fighters, 3 to mechanical failures when their twin-engine Lightnings quit over water hundreds of miles from nearest friendly airfield. The mathematics of P-38 operations in Southwest Pacific are brutally simple. Standard cruise settings give you maximum 7 hours flight time, which translates to approximately 570-mile combat radius. Any target beyond that range is unreachable. Any mission lasting longer than 7 hours means you're swimming home. And Lindbergh, this civilian technical consultant who arrived at your base 3 weeks ago carrying nothing but leather flight jacket and reputation from different era, claims he can extend your range by 400 miles. Nearly 30%, using engine settings that violate every procedure you've been taught since flight school. The resistance isn't just skepticism. It's visceral distrust mixed with institutional opposition. Your squadron commander, Major Thomas McGuire, already credited with 31 kills, second highest scoring American ace in Pacific, sits in briefing room with arms crossed, expression suggesting Lindbergh is selling snake oil. Colonel Charles MacDonald, commanding 475th Fighter Group, stands nearby looking equally unconvinced. Technical Sergeant Mike Kowalski, your crew chief who's kept your Lightning flying through jungle humidity and tropical storms, told you bluntly yesterday, "Sir, if you run those engines at 1,600 RPM with high manifold pressure, you'll crack cylinder heads within 2 hours. I've seen it happen. Thermal stress alone will—" You interrupted. Lindbergh claims he's been flying these exact settings for 3 weeks without problems. Kowalski's response was immediate. Lindbergh's not a combat pilot anymore, Captain. He's civilian tinkering with equipment he doesn't fully understand. When those engines quit over Seram Sea with nearest land 200 miles away, being Charles Lindbergh won't make you float. But here's what changed your mind. What brought you to this pre-dawn briefing where Lindbergh is proposing most dangerous test flight of your military career? Yesterday afternoon, Lindbergh returned from solo navigation flight lasting 6 hours and 43 minutes. His fuel gauges showed 210 gallons remaining. You and 3 other pilots flew identical mission profile, same altitude, same route, same weather conditions. Your fuel gauges showed 47 gallons remaining when you landed. Lieutenant Ted Hanks, flying as your wingman, had 52 gallons. Captain Al Coburn, who everyone considers most fuel-efficient pilot in squadron, showed 61 gallons. Lindbergh used 160 gallons less fuel than best pilot in your unit on identical mission. That's not measurement error. That's not lucky tailwinds. That's fundamental difference in how engines were operated. And if it works, if this technique is real rather than dangerous delusion, it changes everything about what P-38s can accomplish in Pacific Theater. The briefing room at Hollandia is converted Quonset hut, corrugated metal radiating heat even at dawn, filled with 16 fighter pilots ranging from 22 to 34 years old, all watching Lindbergh with mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed hostility. He's standing at blackboard covered with technical diagrams, chalk in hand, looking nothing like legendary aviator from newsreels. He's 42 but appears older, face weathered by years of flying experimental aircraft, eyes intense with focus that made him both celebrity and controversial figure. His reputation is complicated. Aviation hero who became isolationist spokesman before Pearl Harbor, opposed American entry into war until December 7, 1941, made speeches that many considered pro-Nazi sympathizing. Roosevelt administration banned him from military service, so he's here as civilian technical consultant for United Aircraft Corporation, manufacturer of engines powering your P-38s, officially testing equipment in combat conditions, but unofficially trying to prove he still matters. That personal history creates tension beyond technical disagreements. Some pilots respect his aviation expertise. Others resent civilian telling combat veterans how to fly. Major McGuire speaks first, voice carrying authority of 31 kills and countless hours over hostile territory. Mr. Lindbergh, with respect, what you're proposing contradicts every operational manual and technical order we've received. Allison engine specifications explicitly state, never exceed 1,950 RPM during cruise operations. Always maintain auto-rich mixture except during high-altitude operations above 20,000 feet. Never operate over square, meaning manifold pressure higher than RPM divided by 10. You're suggesting we violate all three simultaneously. Lindbergh doesn't argue. He simply writes numbers on blackboard. Standard cruise, 2,200 RPM, 31 inches manifold pressure, auto-rich mixture. Fuel consumption, approximately 90 gallons per hour per engine, 180 gallons per hour total. Maximum endurance, roughly 7 hours with reserve. Everyone nods. Those are exact figures from technical manual. Proposed cruise, 1,600 RPM, 40 inches manifold pressure, auto-lean mixture. Fuel consumption, approximately 62 gallons per hour per engine, 124 gallons per hour total. Maximum endurance, roughly 9.3 hours with reserve. Silence. Then Captain Jerry Johnson, experienced pilot with 14 kills, voices what everyone's thinking. Sir, that's physically impossible. You can't reduce RPM by 600 while increasing manifold pressure by 9 inches without destroying bearings, cracking heads, or detonating fuel mixture. The thermal and mechanical stress would what? Lindbergh interrupts calmly. I've been flying these exact settings for 73 hours over past 3 weeks. Engines show normal wear, temperatures remain within acceptable ranges, no mechanical failures. McGuire leans forward. You've been flying solo navigation missions at moderate power settings. Combat operations are different. We go from idle to war emergency power repeatedly during engagements. Your engines might survive gentle cruise operations, but fail under combat stress. Then, test it, Lindbergh responds. Select 4 pilots. We'll fly identical mission profile together. I'll use my settings, you use standard procedures. We'll measure fuel consumption directly, compare engine temperatures throughout flight, and verify whether this technique works under operational conditions. McDonald stands, ending debate. We'll conduct controlled test today, weather permitting. 4 aircraft. Lindbergh plus 3 volunteers. Mission profile, 8-hour patrol over Seram Sea, simulating long-range bomber escort. Standard combat altitudes, representative power variations. We'll monitor everything, fuel flow, cylinder head temperatures, oil pressure, engine performance. If Lindbergh's settings work without mechanical failures, we'll consider implementing them squadron-wide. If his engines quit or show dangerous stress, we'll court-martial anyone who tries this nonsense again. He looks directly at you. Captain Henshaw, your test flight lead. Select 2 additional pilots, wheels up at 0700. You choose carefully. Lieutenant Hanks, because he's methodical, observant, will document everything accurately. Captain Coburn, because he's technically minded, understands engines better than most mechanics. At 6:47 a.m., 4P-38 Lightning's taxi to runway through humid New Guinea morning. Your aircraft, call sign Dominator 2, carries standard fuel load, 410 gallons internal, 2 165-gallon drop tanks, total 740 gallons. Lindbergh's P-38, Call sign Civilian 1, unofficial designation that annoys everyone, carries identical load. You run pre-flight checks twice, verifying every system. Engines sound perfect, smooth, powerful, exactly as they should. At 7:02 a.m., tower clears takeoff. 4 Lightnings accelerate down runway, twin tails gleaming in morning light, lifting into tropical sky toward 8 hours that will either revolutionize Pacific air operations or prove that legendary aviator from 1927 has become dangerous liability in 1944. For first 30 minutes, everyone flies standard procedures. 2,200 RPM, 31 inches manifold pressure, auto-rich mixture. Fuel consumption matches predictions exactly, your gauges dropping steadily as expected. Then Lindbergh's voice crackles over radio. Test aircraft reducing to cruise settings. RPM coming back to 1,600, manifold pressure increasing to 40 inches, mixture leaning to auto-lean. Monitoring temperatures and performance. You watch his aircraft closely through canopy. Nothing changes visibly. His P-38 maintains formation, speed constant, altitude steady. But sound changes. His engines, which had been producing familiar high-pitched whine at 2,200 RPM, drop to deeper, slower rhythm. It sounds wrong. It sounds like engines dying. Your training screams warnings. Those engines are about to quit. Over-square operation, high manifold pressure with low RPM, creates excessive cylinder pressures that crack heads and damage bearings. Lean mixture near auto-lean boundary risks detonation that destroys pistons in seconds. But minutes pass. 10, 20, 30. Lindbergh's P-38 continues flying normally. His voice reports calmly. Cylinder head temperatures nominal, 290 degrees average. Oil pressure normal, 75 psi. Fuel flow reading 64 gallons per hour per engine. All parameters within acceptable ranges. You check your own instruments. Cylinder heads at 310 degrees, oil pressure 73 psi, fuel flow 88 gallons per hour per engine. His temperatures are actually lower despite higher manifold pressure, and his fuel consumption is 27% less. This contradicts everything you understand about reciprocating engines. Lieutenant Hanks breaks radio silence. Civilian 1, request verification. Are you actually showing lower cylinder temperatures with higher manifold pressure? Affirmative, Dominator 3. Lower RPM reduces friction and heat generation. Higher manifold pressure increases combustion efficiency but doesn't produce excessive heat when mixture is properly leaned. The manuals are wrong about over-square operations at cruise power settings. 2 hours into flight, you're 400 miles from Hollandia over empty Pacific, maintaining 15,000 feet altitude on patrol route that simulates bomber escort profile. Your fuel gauges show 480 gallons remaining, 260 burned in 2 hours. Lindbergh reports 550 gallons remaining, 190 burned in same period. That's 70 gallons difference, equivalent to 45 minutes additional flight time. If that differential maintains throughout mission, Lindbergh will land with enough reserve fuel to fly another hour while you're approaching emergency reserve. Captain Coburn voices what you're thinking. This is real. The technique actually works. We could reach Balikpapan with this range. We could escort bombers all the way to Borneo and back. Balikpapan, major Japanese oil facility in Borneo, 800 miles from Hollandia, has been unreachable for P-38 escorts. B-24 heavy bombers can reach it but arrive undefended, taking heavy losses to Japanese fighters. If P-38s could extend range enough to provide escort, entire strategic situation changes. But doubt remains. 4 hours into flight, you deliberately test combat simulation, reduce RPM to idle, drop nose, accelerate to maximum speed, then firewall throttles simulating dogfight recovery. Your engines respond instantly, smooth power increase, temperatures and pressures normal. Over radio, Civilian 1, simulate combat emergency power. Let's see if your engines respond properly after 4 hours at reduced RPM. Lindbergh acknowledges, and you watch his P-38 execute identical maneuver. His aircraft accelerates, engines roaring at war emergency power, pulls hard climbing turn, then returns to formation. His voice reports, "Emergency power normal, full throttle response immediate, no hesitation or roughness." Engines behaved exactly as expected. Still skeptical, you request, "Reduce back to cruise settings. I want to see transition." Lindbergh complies, and you listen carefully through radio static. His engine note drops from combat scream back to that wrong-sounding deeper rhythm at 1,600 RPM. Transition is smooth, no coughing or roughness. 4 hours of reduced RPM hasn't fouled plugs or damaged anything. 5 hours in, you're 600 miles from base, approaching maximum range for standard cruise settings. Your mission plan called for turning back now, ensuring enough fuel to reach Hollandia with required reserve. Your fuel gauges show 285 gallons, enough for return trip with maybe 20 minutes reserve if winds cooperate. Lindbergh shows 380 gallons, enough to continue another 90 minutes before needing to turn back. That's not minor difference. That's game-changing capability, allowing missions into hostile territory currently unreachable. Lieutenant Hanks transmits observation. Dominator lead, recommendation. Remain on station additional 30 minutes to verify Civilian 1's endurance claim. We can return using standard settings with adequate fuel. You consider carefully. Extending mission means operating closer to fuel margins than comfortable, but proving Lindbergh's technique requires completing full test profile. Affirm, Dominator 3. Will remain on station. Civilian 1, continue cruise settings. Everyone else maintain standard procedures for comparison. 6 hours into mission, you're experiencing truth that institutional resistance tried to prevent. Lindbergh is right, manuals are wrong, and 20 years of aviation doctrine about reciprocating engine operations has been based on conservative assumptions that don't match reality. His engines haven't failed, his temperatures remain normal, his fuel consumption stays 27 to 30% lower than yours across every flight regime tested. You've simulated combat, tested emergency power, verified transitions, and monitored every possible indicator of impending failure. There is no failure. There is only working technique that expands P-38's tactical radius by 400 miles. Difference between staying near New Guinea coast versus reaching deep into Japanese-held territories currently beyond Allied air power. At 1:17 p.m., 7 hours after takeoff, you turn back toward Hollandia. Your fuel gauges show 145 gallons, enough for a 2-hour return flight with minimal reserve. Lindbergh shows 235 gallons, comfortable margin exceeding yours by 90 gallons. Landing at Hollandia at 3:04 p.m., 8 hours and 2 minutes after takeoff, your wheels touch down with fuel gauges reading 48 gallons. Lieutenant Hanks lands showing 51 gallons. Captain Coburn, still most fuel-efficient pilot using standard settings, shows 59 gallons. Lindbergh lands last, taxiing to parking area where ground crew chief immediately checks fuel levels with calibrated dipstick. His report stops everyone. "Sir, Civilian 1 has 212 gallons remaining. That's enough fuel for another 90 minutes flight." Colonel McDonald, who's been monitoring from Operations Center, walks slowly around Lindbergh's P-38, examining engines carefully. No leaks, no unusual wear patterns, no scorching indicating thermal stress. He climbs ladder to check cylinder heads directly. Normal coloration, no cracks, temperatures cooling normally. Finally, he turns to assembled pilots and asks question everyone knows is coming. How many of you would use Lindbergh's settings on actual combat mission? Silence. This is decision point. You raise your hand slowly. Captain Coburn does same. Lieutenant Hanks hesitates only moment before following. One by one, every pilot who flew test mission volunteers. Then Major McGuire, who'd been most skeptical, speaks. "I'll fly combat mission using Lindbergh's settings tomorrow. If it works under combat stress, Entire squadron converts. Colonel MacDonald nods approval. Mission brief at 0530. Target: Japanese airfield at Wewak, 640 miles from here. Standard doctrine says that's beyond safe P-38 escort radius. Tomorrow, we prove doctrine wrong. That night, sleep comes difficult. You lie in tent listening to tropical rain hammering corrugated metal roof, running calculations repeatedly. Tomorrow's mission to Wewak will test everything under worst possible conditions. Long-range transit, potential air-to-air combat, ground attack requiring full power, return flight with potential headwinds. If Lindbergh's technique fails under those stresses, pilots die. Morning briefing at 5:31 a.m. fills operations tent with 16 pilots plus Lindbergh. Intelligence officer spreads reconnaissance photos across table. Wewak Airfield, northeastern New Guinea coast, heavily defended Japanese base hosting approximately 40 fighters and 20 bombers. American strategy requires neutralizing that facility before advancing Allied positions westward. Problem: Wewak lies 640 miles from Hollandia, requiring 1,280-mile round trip. Standard P-38 combat radius of 570 miles makes mission theoretically impossible. MacDonald explains, using Lindbergh's fuel management, we calculate 750-mile radius becomes achievable. That gives us margin for combat operations over target and return with reserve. If calculations are wrong, we'll be swimming home. Questions? Jerry Johnson asks practical one. Sir, what if some pilots' engines fail using reduced RPM settings? Do we abort entire mission or continue? MacDonald's answer is blunt. If engines fail due to improper technique, that's pilot error. If they fail because technique itself is flawed, mission commander makes tactical decision whether to continue or withdraw. This is test under fire. 16. P-38 Lightning's taxi at 6:47 a.m. Morning sun already heating New Guinea landscape. Your aircraft, now designated Dominator Lead, carries full fuel load plus centerline and wing drop tanks. Total 910 gallons including externals. Lindbergh flies as Civilian One, positioned where everyone can observe. Takeoff proceeds normally, formation climbing eastward toward Japanese-held territory. At 7,200 feet altitude, MacDonald's voice transmits, all units implement Lindbergh cruise settings. RPM to 1600, manifold pressure to 40 inches, mixtures to auto lean. Monitor temperatures and report any anomalies immediately. You reduce throttles smoothly, feeling your Lightning's engines drop from familiar high-pitched scream to deeper, slower rhythm that still sounds fundamentally wrong despite yesterday's successful test. Every pilot in formation experiences same psychological pressure. Training insisting these settings will destroy engines conflicts with empirical evidence proving they work. 30 minutes into flight, Lieutenant Bobby Johnson transmits concern. Lead, this is Dominator 7, cylinder head temperatures climbing, reading 315 degrees, approaching redline. You check your own gauges. 292 degrees, well within safe range. Dominator 7, verify mixture setting. Ensure auto lean, not auto rich. Brief pause, then Johnson responds, Lead, confirmed problem. Had mixture set to auto rich by mistake. Correcting now. Temperatures dropping. The incident highlights learning curve. Lindbergh's technique requires precise execution, small errors, wrong mixture setting, improper manifold pressure, eliminate benefits and create problems. This isn't simplified procedure, it's optimized process demanding higher pilot skill than standard operations. But for pilots who execute correctly, results are dramatic. Your fuel gauges, which would normally show 650 gallons remaining after 1 hour at standard cruise, read 715 gallons, extra 65 gallons translating to roughly 45 minutes additional endurance. 2 hours into mission, approximately 430 miles from Hollandia, you reach point where standard fuel planning would require turning back to ensure safe return. Instead, formation continues eastward toward Wewak. Every pilot monitors fuel carefully, calculating reserves, comparing consumption against predictions. Lindbergh's voice provides calm reassurance. All aircraft showing fuel consumption averaging 64 gallons per hour per engine. Range calculations confirm Wewak achievable with adequate combat reserve. Major McGuire, flying wing position, adds observation. These settings actually make formation flying easier. Lower RPM reduces propeller torque, improves directional stability. Aircraft feels more stable in cruise configuration. That's unexpected benefit nobody predicted. Reduced engine speed creates smoother flight characteristics beyond just fuel savings. At 9:18 a.m., 3 hours and 31 minutes after takeoff, Wewak appears ahead, coastal airfield with multiple runways, revetments protecting Japanese aircraft, anti-aircraft positions surrounding facility. Intelligence estimated 40 enemy fighters present, but visual count suggests more. You spot at least 50 aircraft parked in various dispersal areas. This won't be simple strike mission. Japanese defenders will respond aggressively. Formation descends from cruise altitude to attack altitude, 12,000 feet, positioning for dive bomb runs on parked aircraft. Your wingman, Captain Ted Hanks, calls out, "Multiple bogeys, 3 o'clock high, approximately 15 contacts, probably Zeros scrambling to intercept." McDonald's response is immediate. "All units increase RPM to combat power. We'll engage fighters first, then hit ground targets." You advance throttles smoothly, bringing engines from 1,600 RPM cruise up to 2,600 RPM combat setting. Response is instant and perfect. No hesitation, no rough running, just smooth power increase exactly as designed. 3 hours at reduced RPM hasn't fouled spark plugs or caused any performance degradation. The air battle develops fast. Mitsubishi, a 6M0 fighters climbing aggressively, Japanese pilots experienced and determined. You select nearest target, Japanese fighter at 11 o'clock, closing head-on, fire burst from 4, 50 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon mounted in nose. Hits sparkle across Zero's engine cowling, and enemy aircraft rolls inverted, trailing smoke. No time for confirmation. 2 more Zeros maneuvering onto your tail, forcing hard defensive turn that loads 6 Gs onto airframe. Your Lightning handles beautifully despite stress, engines providing full power without hesitation. Around you, dogfight intensifies. P-38s and Zeros twisting through tropical sky, tracer fire creating geometric patterns, radio filled with combat calls. McGuire shoots down 2 Zeros in quick succession, his voice calm. "Splash 2 bandits. Dominator 3, you've got 1 at 6 o'clock. Break right." Formation tactics work perfectly. Mutual support, coordinated attacks, no friendly casualties despite intense Japanese resistance. After 12 minutes of air-to-air combat, Japanese fighter presence is eliminated. 8 Zeros confirmed destroyed, remainder fleeing westward. Formation regroups, refocuses on primary mission, destroying aircraft and facilities at Wewak Airfield. You lead dive bombing attack, rolling inverted and pulling through to 60-degree dive angle, releasing single 500-pound bomb at 4,000 feet before recovering at treetop level. Your bomb impacts directly on revetment holding 3 Japanese bombers, creating massive secondary explosion as aviation fuel ignites. Other P-38s follow, systematically destroying parked aircraft, fuel dumps, ammunition storage. Ground fire is intense, anti-aircraft guns throwing up deadly streams of tracers, but formation tactics and speed minimize exposure. Within 18 minutes, Wewak Airfield is inferno. At least 30 Japanese aircraft destroyed or damaged, multiple facilities burning, operational capability severely degraded. McDonald calls withdrawal. All units form up heading 270, return cruise settings, assess battle damage. You reduce throttles again, bringing engines back to 1,600 RPM, and conduct quick damage assessment. Your Lightning shows several bullet holes in left wing from Zero gunfire, none affecting flight controls or fuel systems. Formation check reveals all 16 P-38s survived, though Lieutenant Johnson has minor hydraulic damage and Captain Williams reports one engine running rough but manageable. More significantly, fuel checks show everyone has adequate reserves for return flight. Your gauges read 385 gallons remaining after 3.5 hours flight plus intensive combat. Enough for a 400-mile return trip with reasonable margin. Standard cruise settings would have left you with maybe 220 gallons at this point, creating dangerous fuel situation with no safety margin. The return flight becomes vindication. Hours pass smoothly, engines running perfectly at reduced RPM settings, fuel consumption exactly matching predictions. At 2:47 p.m., Hollandia appears ahead, palm trees and metal Quonset huts marking home base. You land with 127 gallons remaining, more fuel than many missions where you'd landed after shorter distances using standard procedures. Ground Crew Chief Sergeant Kowalski, who'd predicted catastrophic engine failure, meets you at parking area with stunned expression. He climbs ladder, examines engines closely, spark plugs clean, no oil leaks, cylinder heads showing normal coloration, no indication of thermal stress or mechanical damage. Finally, he looks at you. Sir, I was wrong. I don't understand how this works, but it definitely works. These engines look better than after standard missions. Lower operating temperatures, less carbon buildup, everything cleaner than expected. Debriefing reveals full impact. Mission to target previously considered unreachable, successful aerial combat, comprehensive ground attack, all aircraft returned safely. 0 friendly casualties. Fuel consumption averaged 28% lower than standard procedures, proving technique works under maximum stress conditions including prolonged combat maneuvering. Colonel McDonald makes decision immediately. Effective tomorrow, all P-38 operations in this theater will implement Lindbergh cruise settings as standard procedure. We'll conduct training for pilots not present today, modify technical orders, and disseminate this information to other fighter groups across Pacific. He looks at Lindbergh. Mr. Lindbergh, you've just changed how American fighters operate in this war. Officially, I should probably court-martial you for violating every engine manual in existence. Unofficially, you've saved lives and enabled missions we couldn't accomplish before. Thank you. Over next 3 weeks, transformation spreads across 5th Air Force fighter units. Every P-38 squadron receives briefings on Lindbergh's technique, now officially called Extended Range Cruise Procedures to avoid mentioning civilian consultant who developed them. Pilots practice during training flights, ground crews monitor engine conditions, maintenance logs document performance. Results are consistently positive. Fuel savings average 27 to 30% depending on conditions. Engines show no unusual wear. Mechanical failure rates actually decrease slightly due to lower operating temperatures. Most significantly, operational radius extends from 570 miles to nearly 750 miles, enabling American fighters to escort bombers deep into Japanese-held territory previously beyond reach. Targets that required unescorted bomber raids, resulting in heavy losses to Japanese fighters, now receive full P-38 protection throughout entire mission profiles. Strategic impact becomes apparent quickly. In August 1944, 5th Air Force conducts raids on Balikpapan oil facilities in Borneo, 800 miles from base, previously unreachable for fighter escorts. B-24 heavy bombers arrive with full P-38 protection, engage Japanese defenders effectively, and return with minimal losses. Japanese oil production from Balikpapan drops 60% within month. Similar missions follow: strikes on Philippines airfields, attacks on shipping in South China Sea, interdiction of Japanese supply lines previously considered too distant for fighter coverage. Each mission proves value of extended range capability that Lindbergh's technique provides. By September, intelligence estimates suggest Japanese air defenses have been forced to redistribute fighter assets to cover wider areas, diluting their effectiveness everywhere because American P-38s can now appear at locations Japanese planners assumed were safe from escort fighter presence. Personal vindication comes for Lindbergh on July 28, 1944, when he flies combat mission with McGuire's flight to Searam Island. During engagement with Japanese fighters, Lindbergh encounters Mitsubishi A6M0 flown by experienced Japanese pilot, later identified as Warrant Officer Shoichi Sugita, credited with 11 victories. The dogfight is brief and decisive. Lindbergh demonstrates same aerial combat skills that made him successful pilot 2 decades earlier, maneuvering his P-38 into firing position and shooting down Zero with controlled burst. It's his only aerial victory of World War II, but significance extends beyond single kill. It proves civilian consultant can execute combat operations successfully using techniques he developed, silencing remaining critics who'd suggested his methods were theoretical constructs unsuitable for actual fighting. McGuire, who'd been most skeptical initially, later writes in report, "Mr. Lindbergh demonstrated exceptional flying skill and tactical awareness. His techniques work under maximum stress conditions, including aerial combat against experienced enemy pilots. I recommend adopting his procedures across all P-38 units without further delay." The technique spreads beyond P-38s. Pilots flying other twin-engine aircraft, P-61 Black Widow night fighters, B-25 Mitchell medium bombers, begin experimenting with similar fuel management principles. Results vary depending on engine type and aircraft design, but core concept proves universally applicable. Reducing RPM while maintaining manifold pressure through lean mixture settings improves fuel efficiency without sacrificing performance. By war's end in August 1945, extended-range cruise procedures have become standard across American aviation, affecting thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of flight hours. Fuel savings translate directly to operational advantages: longer missions, greater tactical flexibility, improved safety margins. Lives saved are harder to quantify but undeniably significant. Pilots who would have run out of fuel over ocean using standard procedures instead returned safely because Lindbergh's technique gave them extra endurance needed to reach home. Post-war analysis by Army Air Force's technical experts confirms what combat pilots learned empirically. Conventional wisdom about reciprocating engine operations had been wrong for decades. Standard procedures emphasized high RPM and rich mixtures, because engineers assumed those settings minimized risk of mechanical failure. But actual testing under controlled conditions proves lower RPM with proper mixture management actually reduces mechanical stress, lowers operating temperatures, and extends engine life. The manuals weren't just conservative, they were actively counterproductive, sacrificing fuel efficiency and range without providing corresponding reliability benefits. Lindbergh's contribution wasn't inventing new technology or designing revolutionary equipment. It was questioning institutional assumptions and proving through practical demonstration that better methods existed despite what official doctrine claimed. That kind of innovation, challenging accepted wisdom with empirical evidence, becomes case study taught at military technical schools for generations afterward. Charles Lindbergh leaves Pacific Theater in September 1944, his technical consulting assignment completed. He returns to United States, having flown approximately 50 combat missions, officially credited with 1 aerial victory, unofficially responsible for changing how American air power operates in Pacific War. His technique extends P-38 combat radius by 180 miles, enables missions previously considered impossible, and saves uncounted lives by providing extra fuel margin that allows pilots to reach base safely rather than ditching in ocean. Yet his contribution receives no formal military recognition. No medals, no official commendations, just quiet acknowledgement from pilots who understand what he accomplished. His controversial pre-war politics ensures that Roosevelt administration never publicly credits him, though military professionals recognize significance of his work. Decades later, after Lindbergh dies in 1974, veterans from 475th Fighter Group establish Memorial Fund honoring his contributions to Pacific air operations. The plaque reads simply, "Charles Lindbergh, Technical Consultant, 5th Air Force, 1944. Extended range techniques developed during his service enabled American fighters to dominate Pacific skies and contributed directly to Allied victory. Modern aviation still uses principles Lindbergh proved in 1944. Contemporary piston-engine aircraft operations emphasize lean-of-peak mixture management, reduced RPM cruise settings, and optimized power configurations that maximize fuel efficiency while maintaining engine longevity. Every pilot training on reciprocating engines learns these concepts, often without knowing their origin in wartime testing by controversial civilian consultant over hostile Pacific waters. The techniques have become so standard, so obviously correct, that few question why they once were considered dangerous violations of proper procedure. That's ultimate measure of successful innovation, when revolutionary idea becomes conventional wisdom so thoroughly that next generation can't imagine anyone ever thought differently. Lindbergh's combat missions with 475th Fighter Group lasted less than 4 months, but impact continues affecting aviation operations 80 years later. The sound of engines running at 1,600 RPM, which first seemed so wrong to combat pilots in 1944, became normal operational soundtrack for piston-engine aircraft worldwide. Your story doesn't end at Hollandia in 1944. You, Captain Robert Duke Henshaw, continue flying P-38s through end of Pacific War, accumulating 63 combat missions, 12 confirmed aerial victories, surviving intact largely because Lindbergh's fuel management gave you margins needed to reach base safely after missions extending beyond what standard procedures allowed. After war, you joined commercial aviation, flying passenger aircraft across Pacific routes that parallel fighter missions you'd flown in combat. You retire in 1978 after 33 years in aviation, having personally logged over 20,000 flight hours in dozens of aircraft types. At your retirement party, someone asks what single event during your career had greatest impact on flying. You answer without hesitation. July 28, 1944, when civilian named Lindbergh proved that everything we'd been taught about engine management was wrong. That day changed everything, not just for that mission, but for every flight I made afterward. Sometimes most important innovations come from outsiders willing to question institutional assumptions everyone else accepts without examination. Lindbergh arrived at Hollandia as controversial civilian with complicated reputation, challenged fundamental doctrine about reciprocating engine operations, proved his techniques worked under worst possible conditions, and changed how military aviation operated across entire theater of war. He didn't do it by inventing new technology or building revolutionary equipment. He did it by thinking critically about accepted procedures and demonstrating empirically that better methods existed. That's lesson extending far beyond wartime aviation into any field where institutional inertia prevents adoption of superior techniques simply because they contradict conventional wisdom. The pilots who initially resisted Lindbergh's methods weren't stupid or stubborn, they were following training that emphasized caution over innovation. But when empirical evidence proved that caution was misplaced, they adapted quickly because survival depends on accepting reality regardless of what manuals say. That's why U.S. pilots started killing their engines, reducing RPM to settings doctrine said would cause catastrophic failure, and discovered they could fly 9 hours non-stop instead of the 7 hours that regulations promised was maximum achievable. The engines didn't die. The regulations were wrong. And one civilian with legendary name and controversial reputation proved it by risking his life flying over hostile ocean to demonstrate that thinking differently about familiar problems can produce results that change everything. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't flying into combat. It's questioning whether the way everyone's been doing something is actually the best way to do it.